Thank you. So we're being recorded, and thanks for turning that on, Julia. I appreciate that. So the discussion draft, as I was saying, after we went through introductions, would be to gather feedback from the public. Staff would digest that feedback, synthesize things, and end up with what we call a proposed draft. And that's really the first step in the really formal adoption process of a land use set of regulations or changes. And that proposed plan would again go out to the public, but importantly goes to the Portland Planning and Sustainability Commission for public hearings in which they take public testimony. And then the Planning Commission ultimately makes a recommendation to the Portland City Council. And then they vote on it as well in a public meeting setting with public hearings. So we're at the first step here, and we want to walk you through some of that. We sent you a couple of documents. I want to just take a quick survey of the folks here. Is there anybody that was not able to download the documents or download them yet? I'm not hearing anything or seeing a hand waving, so I assume you all got them. That's good. If you didn't, I believe those links are going to expire relatively soon. If you haven't got them, I can get you a link to them if you find that they're expired for you, but hopefully everybody's got them. So I just want to review the agenda really quickly. I'm going to share my screen, and then we're going to walk through a presentation summarizing what's in the discussion draft. But before we get going, I want to see if, well, let me share the agenda first. A little out of practice with you all, so. So that's the agenda for today. We're going to recap where we left off, and then we're going to talk about the discussion draft a little bit. And we just want to talk a little bit about kind of the next step in the process, the public process, and what we're trying to do there, and then wrap up. We'll be covering both land use and transportation pieces in this discussion draft preview. I also want to walk you through a recap of where we've been before. But before we get going, I mentioned some of the housekeeping in terms of the process for the discussion draft and the public process. We are thinking that we would have one more meeting with you all after we get comments back on the discussion draft. So we do anticipate one more of those in the springtime. I'll share a schedule with you a little bit later on. But I did want to leave a comment or an opportunity here to hear if PWG members have any comments, questions, or anything right off the bat before we get going in the meeting, so we could try to address them, as we're speaking or going through the information today. So does anybody have a burning question or comment? I saw Brian's hand go up, and then I think Steve. So why don't we go to Brian first?
Yeah, just kind of process wise, are we going to be just providing comments as we're going through things here today? Because you said in there, I reviewed both of the documents, but I think you mentioned in your email that not everybody had to. Yeah. So in order to get through all of it, did you want us to provide our comments from the working group after this, or just throughout when we're going through it?
That's a great question. I think today what we were hoping to do is kind of walk through the summary and get initial impressions from you, or initial, comments about, oh, this information is understandable or it's not understandable, or how can we digest it? If you have very detailed comments, I'm hoping that we can get those in writing before the end of the period. We're going to extend that to the November 17th. So we'll have a full 2 weeks from here to get your written comments. We'll also take your comments kind of orally, if you want to do that. I'll mention this at the end. We've got 3 office hours, so to speak, set up, so that if folks want to just, call in, we'll set up a Zoom meeting or a call with you all to kind of listen and talk through some of the questions or comments that you have individually as well. So we've got an approach to that, but we don't need your detailed comments today. But we will pause in a couple of places for reactions and thoughts. Steve, did you have a comment or question, or did that answer what you were going to ask?
It helps. The 17th is better than the 15th, but representing an organization, really need to take it back to our committee and the board. And, our committee meets weekly, so it's relatively able to do so, but that's still, it's precedent for us to be able to provide, meaningful comments in that period of time. But we'll do it. We'll do it.
I just want to
I don't know if
reinforce.
there's any other organizations that are represented here, so.
Well, we've got NEBA and we've got, I believe we have at least NEBA on the group. So I do want to reemphasize for the group that we're not expecting this group to give formal feedback and comments in order to, influence necessarily the draft. We will listen to that and we want to understand that, but the discussion draft will be out there for a much longer period of time. And that really is the time when, like, if I know NWDA likes to dig into the details, as would other interested parties, that's the opportunity to really dig in. What we're looking for on this is really your initial hits on, this isn't understandable, or you need to clarify this. I mean, if there's some serious issues with the proposal, we want to hear about those, but we think the proposal is an evolution of what we started with. So we're really looking for clarifying kind of comments at this point in time, or issues that you think we'll hear from in the public that you want to bring to our attention that we need to know about, things of that nature.
Understood.
Make sense? Okay. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and launch into just kind of a recap of where we were last time, and then start walking through the presentation. Any thoughts from staff before I get into that? Julia, does that make sense to you?
Sounds good.
Okay. Can't see you, so I'm going to assume that's okay. So I just want to recap kind of where we left off in our last meeting in February. In February, we were talking about transportation and some land use issues, and recapping kind of where we left off from our last November meeting, which was really when we dealt with land use in detail. And if you all recall, we kind of arrived at this hybrid scenario 4, which synthesized elements of scenario 1, which was the industrial focus scenario, and scenario 3, which was the mixed use focus scenario, into a hybrid that focused mixed use development west of Highway 30 and maintained industrial and employment designations primarily east of Highway 30. And the reason for that was we found that most of the opportunity for housing and other types of non-industrial employment, most of the opportunity existed west of 30 in the area on the ESCO site and some other sites nearby. And it was also the area where Montgomery Park, who's already zoned for mixed use development, has aspirations for future development that includes housing and other mixed use type of opportunities in that area. So that area kind of ripened as an opportunity for mixed use development. As part of that, we were proposing to maintain an industrial or a non-housing, I would call it, buffer against Nikolai to provide a transition to the industrial district to the north. And east of Highway 30, we found that there wasn't much development potential for mixed use, and that the industrial jobs opportunities there kind of outweighed the opportunity to transition. So we were going to hold the line on the areas west of 30 and potentially consider at some future date the possibility of expanding to allow industrial and creative office in there based on the outcomes of an upcoming economic opportunities analysis that the Bureau of Planning is involved in right now that may change the industrial land supply outlook for Portland. And we also reviewed the comprehensive plan and zoning for the area. And I'll just note that the comprehensive plan suggested some future land uses, and I'm circling those, hopefully you can see my hand, in the area on the ESCO property and thereabouts, that suggested those areas could transition to a mixed employment designation, while the other areas to the east were still planned for industry. But we also noticed that we had the prime industrial overlay, which is shown here in this yellow line, that still applied in the area. And these areas that are within the yellow line and beyond to the north, actually, this is just showing in the more constrained study area that we looked at, that land within those areas is part of our industrial land supply inventory and is therefore constrained in terms of how much change can happen there without some offsets. We also looked at the zoning map in the area and noted that the zoning in some of these areas is still maintained as industrial rather than moving towards the mixed employment. And that may have something to do with the prime industrial overlays being applied there. We shared with you some preliminary thoughts about zoning for what we're calling the preferred scenario, which was the evolution of scenario 4. This map on the top left shows some of those ideas. We also mentioned that as part of this, there were 3 primary implementation conditions that needed to be met to really fully realize change in the area. We're going to talk about those in more detail as we walk through this. Finally, we shared some proposed zoning and comprehensive plan change maps with you. These were shown in February and I think in November as well. And we also shared with you some preliminary ideas about code elements, which you can kind of see at the top of the page here, some zoning concepts in a plan district and some boundaries for a future plan district. So those are shown at the bottom of the page, and kind of a pie chart here showing, how value and public benefits might be distributed. If you remember, one of the key things in this project is, how do we address, change in the area and do it in a more equitable manner that does not impact negatively underrepresented and BIPOC communities, provides opportunities for folks, and does a bit of more equitable sharing of the benefits that might accrue due to public actions such as zoning changes or public investments. So that's kind of where we left off. I'm seeing people nodding their heads, so I assume that looks familiar to folks. So where we're at now is we've got a proposal for a that's coming out. And really, in summary, what we're doing is fostering a new mixed-use neighborhood west of Highway 30. We talked about that in scenario 4, would include changing to the comprehensive plan in that area to facilitate mixed-use development. We want to, as part of that process, create public benefits. And the public benefits that we had been talking about when we last met are coming more into focus now. And the main one that we're looking for is affordable housing. We're going to be proposing to use some zoning bonus tools to achieve that. We'll talk about that in more detail in a minute. Affordable commercial space, again, proposing to use zoning tools to achieve that right now. Some public amenities such as open space and energy efficient buildings. Again, we're looking at using zoning and bonus tools to achieve that. And then some degree of equity and wealth building, primarily for BIPOC communities, and that might be through contracting requirements or something like that through construction, and that would be achieved through a benefits agreement that would be developed with property owners. And overall, we think these public benefits have multiple ways to be achieved. What you're seeing in the discussion draft, at least partially for the top 3, is a proposal to do them through zoning, but there may be other ways to do that through an agreement with property owners. And we want to let that discussion draft period allow for that conversation, both with the public, community members, and property owners to give us feedback on what's the best way to achieve some of those benefits. But we are proposing something in the discussion draft. We want to retain the industrial land east of Highway 30 to maintain our industrial land supply to the degree possible here. And then we also want to maintain that industrial buffer near Nikolai. So what you'll see in the proposed scenario here. It's kind of an evolution of some of the other diagrams we've seen in the past. Again, here in red, the Montgomery Park and ESCO and nearby properties are proposed to become through changes in the comprehensive plan and ultimately zoning, more of a mixed-use character neighborhood served by an extension of Portland streetcar. You'll notice that the streetcar alignment has gone through a little bit of refinement. Julia and the PBOT team are going to talk a little bit about that later, but I just want to point that out to you. But generally, the alignment is in the same place. We've got the light industrial buffer, or the employment buffer to the industrial district here maintained. You'll see that in the zoning proposal. And then over here to the east, again, no change proposed immediately. I mentioned implementation. Oh, before I go there, we do have some graphics that show, and I think these might be in what we've sent out to you, what the future might look like if we retained existing zoning and comp plan designations in the area, which are much more employment focused. So lower scale development, still fairly high levels of building coverage, but the uses are more constrained, would not allow housing or significant office development. And the proposal would allow for something more significant in terms of both office and housing and mixed use development. So this kind of shows you a potential for what the area could look like when fully built out under this type of zoning, at least on the parcels that are most opportune and vacant right now. And these would complement what we're showing here on the left-hand side of the screen are some of the proposals out of the Montgomery Park master plan that show potential for new housing development and other uses on their site. So as we said earlier, there's conditions for implementation that need to be met. And these really haven't changed very much from when we met last and talked back in November and February about this. Because of the industrial land supply constraints, we are still finding that industrial land supply needs to be offset or mitigated prior to really fully implementing the zoning changes on these properties. We'll see in a moment that we're proposing to change the comprehensive plan designations on these properties, but not fully implement this with zoning until this industrial land supply issue can be addressed. And it can be addressed in two ways. It could be addressed through direct offsets to replace the acreage with new industrial zone land, or it could be addressed by contributions to a mitigation fund that we were exploring in terms of setting up, would be coordinating with Bureau of Environmental Services that has a similar but much smaller scale program to deal with brownfields right now, and exploring how that program could be expanded to potentially implement use of this fund. But that would be two ways that the industrial land supply could be offset.
Hey, Barry, I got a quick question. What about the third option of how industrial land supply could be addressed with
through the economic opportunities?
Yeah, through the city declaring that, you know, what has been happening over time of industrial uses moving out of the city and the county, and putting a priority on that in this regard. I saw it mentioned it was mentioned one place that there were three options.
Yes.
But then in the discussion draft, but I see you're only showing two here.
I can
saw that
speak to that, Barry. I think,
go ahead, Eric.
I think the reason we're highlighting these two is that third option, I think it's true that that's technically true that is a third option, but we see that as a fairly unlikely outcome given where we are right now with the update to the economic opportunities analysis. It does not look like we will have the trends that we're seeing and the data we're seeing going into that does not produce that outcome. It remains a possibility that could be part of the political discussion, but
exactly
we're not emphasizing that in this document because from our point of view, it does not look like a likely outcome.
So I'm going to go ahead and go through the rest of them. I think Eric has addressed that, and that could be a comment that we would hear feedback on in the discussion draft as well. Number two condition is that streetcar and infrastructure investment would need to have a fair amount of certainty before we would want to proceed with a zoning change. And that would involve the property owners in the area forming an LID and working with the city to apply for funding for transit investment, and then also figuring out a way to partner with the city to fund transportation investments. Julia may touch on that a little bit more. And then the third is pulling together some kind of a benefits agreement with property owners in the area. And again, as I said, there's 3 or 4 areas that this benefit agreement should touch on. One is affordable housing, one is affordable commercial space, another is public amenities, and the fourth one would be equity and wealth building. some of this can be addressed by zoning. The benefits agreement could potentially supplement or supplant the zoning approach, depending on, how we see that moving forward and how conversations follow through. But right now, again, are proposing to address the first three bullets through a zoning approach. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
But I thought that we weren't changing the zoning. It was just changing the comp plan right now. That's the thing that I maybe people will get confused by, is we're talking about creating a public benefits agreement through the zoning process, but we're not changing the zoning.
Yeah.
There's two elements to the zoning, just to be a little more precise about that. There's the zoning map change, and then there's adoption of zoning code that would be in effect in the zoning code. And we would proceed with adopting zoning code that would be ready and in the code that would apply and would govern the zone change, but we wouldn't be implementing the map change.
Right.
And that's a good nuance to point out.
That is
Yeah.
great. And I'm going to hit the maps will come up next. So yeah, I see Steve has his hand up. Sure.
So I just wanted to clarify, it's the same general question. A moment ago, I believe you said that the public amenities or the benefits, including public amenities, would use bonus options as their generator, as opposed to map change options.
Yeah, the way it will is, let me walk through the two maps and then I can talk about it in a little bit more detail as well. So, but what we're proposing to do is change the comprehensive plan map. That would normally allow a property owner to apply for a zone change. And we were proposing to adopt new zoning code regulations that would apply to this area via a plan district that would also apply to this area when the zoning is applied to the properties. The hitch is that since some of these conditions are not met yet, one of the provisions in the plan district is that you have to meet these conditions to actually achieve the zone change. So in the plan district, if a property were to, for instance, demonstrate that they could meet the industrial land supply constraint and that a streetcar infrastructure investment like LID was pulled together, they would theoretically be eligible to have a zone change. And at that point in time, they could go through the bonus options to either achieve relatively low levels of development or much higher levels of development that would include the public amenities.
I guess what I'm trying to understand, Barry, is that there's kind of two levels of changes to the zoning designations that we're talking about. One is a change to the map, and the second one is essentially bonus incentives on top of the changes to the map.
Correct.
And it sounds like you're saying that the public benefits would essentially be funded out of the second of those two things and not the first. Is that correct?
The public benefits would be derived through the second thing, which is the zoning code tool that is conjoined with the map. They go together.
Yeah, I know, but there's a significant change in the value of the property through the upzoning, and that's not being considered as a funding source for the benefits.
Well, we are
putting two elements of this contingent on the zone change. So in order to get the zone change, the industrial land supply mitigation or offset would have to have occurred, and the streetcar investment would have to be.
I mean, those seem secondary to me. I guess, again, I don't want to get hung up on this, but it sounds like it's a pretty fundamental question about what the trade-offs are here. And I'd like somewhere for this to be really spelled out clearly and soon.
Barry, let me just add one thing. That's why we're proposing to talk about both some kind of an agreement with property owners as well as codifying things in zoning, because zoning is good through a bonus structure to set up expectations that if you're going to do something more intense, then there's these trade-offs. But it doesn't guarantee that you act, right? Because it's a bonus structure. So we want to talk about doing this in tandem with an agreement with the property owners.
I would agree entirely. I mean, it seems like it needs to be attached to the change to the map.
Let me mention one thing before we proceed, and I'll show you the table in just a minute that explains this better, Steve. But I think we've built in some safeguards for that, because while the zoning map would change, the level of entitlement that would happen without going through bonuses is not as significant as it might be otherwise, is what I'll put there. There's limitations on the amount of floor area and the amount of development that can occur without going through bonus processes.
Once you change to EX, I mean,
We'll show you in just a moment.
okay, all right.
Barry, before you move on, Phil has his hand up. I think he has a question.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah.
It's a simple question, but so an individual property owner would be held up until these fairly complex conditions are met. That could be quite a few months or even years out. How does that sit with property owners?
We're still in conversation with property owners. They're seeing this early on in the discussion draft. So I think the discussion draft is intended to generate that conversation. Eric, do you want to add to that, or Brian?
I would hope that it would have answered some of this by now. I mean, this seems like the same question that's been floating around since the beginning.
Well, let me walk you through what we're proposing, and
Okay.
maybe you'll see the logic in it. This is what we want to hear. So again, the first map shows where the area of comprehensive plan change would be. We would be moving all of this area from mixed employment to EX, this area from industrial sanctuary to EX.
Barry, I'm sorry, but could you clarify that area you were just showing? I didn't think was part of the change in the comp plan map, the IS to EX. I thought it was just the ME to EX part.
Now, this area, streetcar would come up through here and travel from 23rd across Roosevelt. So we believe that it makes sense to change the area here between 23rd and 24th to EX to facilitate.
Right. What I'm asking about is the comp plan map does not change that area, though. It changes the area west of 24th, not the area east of 24th.
We are proposing to change the area.
Yes, I
between
understand.
23rd and 24th.
I understand
yes.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's not in sync. That's not in sync with the comp plan as opposed to the area east of 24 or west of 24th.
Well, the area west of 24th is also, this is out of sync with comp plan as well. This is going from mixed employment to EX. So that's a change
Right.
as well.
Well,
In both
that's
areas,
a
we'd be
different level of
amending the
change,
comp
though.
plan.
So those are the two areas of comprehensive plan map change that we're proposing. We are not proposing to change the zoning significantly at this time. As I said, one thing that we are looking at changing and is proposed to change is removal of the K overlay in this area. The K overlay denotes the prime industrial area. And that removal of the K would be necessary to allow property owners to pursue zoning changes in this area quasi judicially. So we are proposing to remove that K overlay at this time, and that would be happening concurrent with a development agreement and changes to the industrial maps. And then finally, I'm showing you what we're calling the future zoning map here. And this is what would be fully realized if property owners were to move forward with their zoning changes quasi judicially, or if in the event that there was a larger, more comprehensive solution found to the industrial land supply, it could be done legislatively. But this would change all of the zones on that Nikolai boundary to EG, which is an employment zone, does not allow housing, would change all of the zones in the area of the ESCO and other nearby sites from IHK to EXD, would change the area, this L-shaped area that includes American Can and the properties between Vaughan and Wilson to EXD, and then would change this area between essentially the highway and 24th from IG1 to EXD. But again, we're not proposing this initially. This is kind of the ultimate, what that ultimate map would look like if property owners initiated changes, or if that we found a solution to this industrial land supply question that could be addressed legislatively. So I do want to show you a couple more, and then I'm going to get to that table, Steve, that you mentioned. So we're creating this new plan district, Von Nicolai Plan District. The diagram on the right shows the plan district outline and the location of the potential streetcar alignment. The diagram on the left shows the plan district and 4 sub-districts that are proposed within this plan district. And the reason we have 4 sub-districts is to some degree address the question that Steve presented, which is, how do you ensure that the public benefits are met? Each of these properties has a different set of existing regulatory conditions and constraints. They're all in different zones, and they all have different floor area limitations and different use limitations. And what we've done is we've tried to arrange the bonus structure to ultimately get to similar levels of development for many of these properties, not all of them, but using a set of tools that kind of graduate how much additional development potential you can get by exercising these bonuses. So we'll walk through those in just a minute. The plan district components that we have, I'm just starting at the beginning, and we'll get to those use regulations in a second. As I mentioned, the zoning map amendments, there would be a limitation on those unless conditions could be met to address industrial mitigation, transit funding, and a master street plan for the area north of Roosevelt Street. There's a few use prohibitions. We're trying to create an urban mixed-use district, very similar to areas in Northwest or in the Pearl District of the Central City, kind of a hybrid of different things. But some of these use prohibitions on some of these auto-oriented uses are typically applied in these kinds of areas. We want to limit retail sales and service in the area to prevent, large scale big box retailers that might be allowed in some of the new zones that we're proposing. We do want to see retail sales and service serving the area that would be housing and more employment focused, but not big boxes. We would be requiring active uses, particularly near the streetcar stops. And then floor area, I want to mention this specifically because this is the tool that we're using to regulate how we are achieving bonuses. Within the different sub-districts, we're specifying specific floor area ratios for these different areas to better leverage these public benefits. And the main public benefit, as I mentioned before, that we're trying to achieve is affordable housing, and we're using these bonus provisions to get that. And we have 3 levels of bonuses that are aimed at leveraging that. So the first one is, I'll explain this by saying we have a base, what I would call a base level of entitlement. We don't express it as base in most cases, but that's what you would get if you don't exercise any bonuses at all in terms of floor area and height. And floor area, for those of you that aren't as familiar with development and zoning tools, floor area is the amount of building area that one can build on a piece of property, and it's expressed as a ratio. A floor area ratio of 1:1, for instance, means that you could build the same amount of building area in terms of square footage as is on the site. So if you had a 10,000 square foot site, you could build a 10,000 square foot building, and that could be expressed as a 1-story building that covered the whole site, or potentially, for example, a 2-story building that covered half of the site. So a floor area ratio is the amount of building area that you can build relative to the site. And so these 3 bonuses are set to allow different amounts of floor area and height depending on what you exercise here. So at one level, we have the inclusionary housing bonus. This is a required housing bonus that's applied throughout the city in residential and mixed use areas. And development that triggers inclusionary housing, which would be development of 20 or more units, would kick in that and is allowed an increment of additional floor area. That's already part of the city's code. And so I'll show you how that works in this district in a minute. We've created 2 new bonuses that would be applied here, and these are the ones where I think we'll get more of the affordable housing and other community benefits. The second one we're calling the Affordable Housing Benefit Bonus, and this one would provide a pathway for additional floor area, quite a bit of additional floor area, and some additional height for meeting the inclusionary housing bonus requirements, and then providing additional contributions to the Affordable Housing Fund above and beyond IH. So this is where the additional affordable housing that we've talked about in previous meetings would come in. A third level of bonus is what we're calling the Plan Development Bonus. This would be applicable on sites over 5 acres, so very large sites. It would allow significant additional building height, up to 130 feet overall height and floor area when the conditions of this bonus are met. So this would require a master plan for the site, essentially, which is reviewed by the Design Commission in a public process. And the other requirements for this plan development bonus would be that they meet the inclusionary housing units, but they provide them on site. They meet the affordable housing benefit bonus requirements, so they're providing contributions above and beyond IH. They provide 15% of the site area as a publicly accessible open area, and they meet more stringent energy efficient building requirements. So this is kind of a master plan provision for the site. Steve, I see you have your hand up. So let me see if I can answer your question really quickly before I go to the next slide that's going to detail some of this.
The plan development proposal would be for the entire study area?
It would be eligible for the entire study area, but only sites over 5 acres could actually apply for that.
But the whole site's over 5 acres, right?
Well, no, sites between, for instance, Vaughan and Wilson are much smaller than 5 acres. The sites between 23rd and 24th are typically smaller than.
So you're
5.
talking about individual parcels then?
Yes.
Okay. So it's different than a master plan in that respect.
Yes, this would be a master plan for a property as opposed to a master plan for the entire area. So it would have to be a significant sized property.
Get it. All right.
Alex, I see you have your hand up really quick. Maybe I can answer your question.
Yeah, thank you. Just wondering, for the third option for the master plan, would that have to touch on transportation and access to the site as well, and how
not a
it fits
master
into the
plan.
network?
It does. It provides a little bit more flexibility in street plan and whatnot, but it does have to address transportation and access. It also would have to address kind of the urban design at the edges of the site, so that there's transitions to areas around the master plan, such that there's some height and bulk transitions that are appropriate for the scale of the neighborhood that's surrounding that.
Great, thanks, Barry.
And the master plan provisions, as they're proposed right now, or plan development provisions, excuse me, are embedded in that volume 2 code. They're at the end of that. So take a look at that. That's where this exists.
Okay, thanks. And I'm sorry, I think I may have missed this, but the subdistrict definition, is that included somewhere?
The subdistricts are identified on the map.
No, I know, but what do they mean?
Oh, well, so again, the different subdistricts will have different floor area and height limits that are allowed within them. And so I'm just going to show you what this is. I don't want to spend.
Is that in one of these documents somewhere?
Volume two. Yep.
It is? Okay, I'm sorry.
All in volume 2. Yep. So just really quickly, this is a lot of numbers to digest, but we're going to walk through it really quickly so you can kind of get an idea of how this would work in these different areas. So Subdistrict A is the buffer along Nikolai. It does not allow housing. We would be ultimately using the ultimate zoning in that area would be EG, an employment zone. It would have a base FAR of 3:1, which is what the EG zone has currently. But that FAR would be for industrial uses, and the maximum FAR for other uses such as commercial would be limited to 1:1. The base height is 65. That's already allowed in EG. But one would have to apply for bonuses to get additional FAR and height. And the way one would do that in this district is meet the requirements for contributions to the affordable housing bonus fund to gain additional floor area. So it's very similar to the way we've applied it in inclusionary housing, where one could either build units on site or contribute to a fund. In this case, one would contribute to that fund on a per square foot basis to gain additional floor area for commercial developments in Subdistrict A. And the reason for that is right now in that subdistrict, office uses and other kinds of commercial uses are limited to 1-to-1 unless they provide contributions to apply for a bonus and make contributions to a transportation fund. So we're trying to mirror that same kind of approach here in Subdistrict A, but we're using contributions to an affordable housing fund to achieve the additional FAR here. There would be still, again, no housing built, but there would be contributions to a fund. In Subdistrict B, which is primarily the ESCO or 1535 site and the area between 23rd and 24th, similarly, the maximum FAR for employment or industrial oriented uses would be 3-to-1, which it is similar to what it currently is. But the maximum FAR for non-industrial uses would be 1-to-1. So for housing or for commercial development, there would be a very limited amount of entitlement available there. The way to get more entitlements would be to exercise a bonus. 3 ways to do that. Through the Inclusionary Housing Fund, you would gain 0.5-to-1 FAR. If that's not enough, one could gain more floor area by achieving the affordable housing benefit bonus, which would bump you all the way up to 5-to-1 FAR. So another 4-to-1 FAR is possible through that, and a little bit of additional height. For the planned development bonus, you could go all the way up to 6-to-1 FAR and 130 feet of height. And again, this adds on more requirements to get to that level. Subdistrict C is basically the Montgomery Park site that's currently zoned EX. That is part of this plan district. The EX zone currently has a base FAR entitlement of 3-to-1. We are not proposing to change that. It would stay at 3-to-1. They also have a current base height allowance of 65 feet. We're not proposing to change that. They have an entitlement to go to 5-to-1 when they meet the inclusionary housing or trigger the inclusionary housing requirements. We're not proposing to change that. They have a maximum height of 65 feet if they trigger the inclusionary housing requirements. Not proposing to change that, but we are proposing to allow additional height if they make contributions to the Affordable Housing Benefit Fund, and additional height and FAR if they go through a plan development master plan and get that approval. So that would open up more floor area and significantly more height for them. And finally, in sub area D, that's the American Can Building and the Vaughn Street corridor. Similar approach to what we've done in A and B, where we have industrial uses that are allowed at a certain amount of floor area. We're allowing them to continue at 3-to-1. But for expanded allowances for housing and commercial development, we're capping those at 1-to-1. And then again, more development potential can be unlocked through use of these bonuses, whether it's the inclusionary housing bonus, the affordable housing benefit bonus, or the planned development bonus. And as I mentioned earlier, some of these sites in Subdistrict B won't be 5 acres. So some of them won't have the ability to use the planned development bonuses, and they may be more in this affordable housing benefit or IH realm in terms of their allowed bonus use. Does that help clarify how we're approaching the height and FAR and how that is used to graduate and incentivize the use of bonuses? Steve,
Yes, it does, Barry. Without commenting on that, it certainly does. I'm just having trouble locating this information in the volume 2. Is it in there somewhere?
I'll point out where those things are at the end of the presentation. Greg, I saw you have your hand up. Why don't I go ahead and answer your question really quickly?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's good information. I was also wondering, you had that graphic early on in the slide presentation showing the current and the future layout. How does that, this is all a lot of numbers, a lot of information. Graphically, does that show one or more of these as far as I don't know if you can go back to that. Maybe
The sub areas. So this map 590-1, this shows those 4 sub areas. And you'll see there, this is the graphic convention of our zoning code. So it's not necessarily as user-friendly as you would like it to be, but you can see they're detailed down here.
Okay, no, I get that. Yeah, that's great. I see how that tied into the different areas, but I was talking about the architectural graphic that it was a little easier to see the 3-dimensional type.
Oh, let me walk through the code and let's save that and we can come back to that a little bit later. Greg, is that okay?
That's fine. Thanks.
So Barry, this information's on page 41 then. I think I finally found it.
In volume
Is that
2,
correct?
probably.
Table 590-1.
That is it. That is it.
Okay.
Okay, so just a few other regulatory things that we're proposing in volume 2. This is all in volume 2. I mentioned the commercial floor area. It's limited in some sub-districts. That was what I just walked through in that table. Again, additional floor area is allowed through the affordable housing benefit bonus option or the plan development bonus option if they go in that direction. Height limits, we're proposing a base height limit of 65 feet. That's what most of those properties are allowed to build to right now. We are proposing a step down height of 45 feet near Vaughn Street to match or mirror the scale of development across the street in the mixed use zones. But one could get additional height via some bonus options. We are proposing a minimum residential density if people go in or property owners go in the direction of developing residential units on their property. And then we have some other typical urban plan district kind of provisions. We're asking for higher levels of window coverage at the ground floor, particularly near transit, near the streetcar alignment. We're asking for active use areas near the streetcar alignment. We're limiting parking and particularly limiting surface parking near the streetcar alignment. One of the new provisions that was in our mixed use zone code were the requirement for on-site open areas for residential units. So we're including that in this plan district. That would be similar to the CM3 zone in the mixed use zones. And what this does is requires a minimum amount of open area per unit that's built, 36 or 48 square feet per unit, depending on the scale of development. Prior to this, some of our more intense zones did not require any open areas for residential development. The intent behind this is to provide either individual or collective green spaces that serve the residential units that are built in these areas. We're applying the design overlay zone, which is a tool that we typically apply in the high density or higher density zones in the city. Steve and others that are familiar with the NWDA de-overlay will be familiar with that. Requires either use of supplemental design standards or potentially review with use of design guidelines, depending on the type of proposal. We're applying a transportation demand management requirement. This is something that is applied in our commercial mixed use zones that requires new developments with residential units, and we're applying this to large commercial developments here to create a transportation demand management plan or subscribe to a off-the-shelf program. And then again, parking, we're regulating the ratios of parking in this area. They're pretty aggressive because we expect this area to be a highly transit-oriented area. So limited amount of parking allowed. And we're also suggesting limitations on the location of where surface parking can be proposed within the area. So before I turn it over to Julia to talk through the alignment and transportation issues in detail, I just want to try to address questions that have come up. So I see Phil has his hand up and I'll look for others.
Mine's pretty quick. Under TDM in the Conway Master Plan area, property owners were required to participate in a TMA. Is that envisioned at all for this area, or haven't you gone that far with the thinking yet?
We haven't gone that far with the code, but I'll let Julia and Mauricio speak to that when they talk about transportation, unless you guys want to hit on that now.
I think I can hit it now. What we have is the citywide, we have a proposal, and we have a regulation that says that upon building new construction, each unit each new housing unit shall provide $1,000, I think, as to be used as for TDM purposes. That wasn't the case at Conway, so I think we started with that premise. That is the what's in the volume 1. And the main approach has been, to go ahead with streetcar and with parking regulations to address the supply. We don't want to overwhelm the district with vehicles, and we want to maximize the density.
And what Mauricio is talking about is the off-the-shelf option. There's also still an option to do a custom through the review.
Right. Yeah. So
For large complex sites, it might be more beneficial to do the review and a custom plan. Smaller sites might be more beneficial to just do the off the shelf. At least was the thinking with the commercial mixed use zones. Steve, did you have another question or?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Any other questions on the land use piece of this before Julia takes over?
Terrific.
Okay. By the way, I want to just set this up before you speak, Julia.
Mhm.
We didn't mention this at the outset. There has been transitions in staff at Peabody, and as you all know, back in February or March, Kate left the project and Peabody, and we have had in the interim period, Zeph Wagner working with us. Some of you are probably familiar with him from his work in Northwest as a project manager and project staff on Peabody. And we're really happy to welcome Julia, who was on the consultant team for our staff, but now is on the Peabody end of staff. So welcome, Julia.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I want to start with just a recap of what we heard from community engagement about transportation, sort of zoom back out a little bit from what we've been talking about with Barry. So we heard support for extending pedestrian and bike routes through the district, including improving connections to Forest Park and to the east, interested in making the district accessible for people of all ages and abilities, and also about the importance of the active ground floor uses, inviting transit stops, and lighting and on-street parking. And we also heard concern about traffic volumes and cut through traffic. There's an interest in exploring a two-way streetcar option on Wilson, which I'll talk about in a moment, and support for creating great urban spaces through transit station environments and other urban spaces on in the district. We have been engaged in conversations with community-based organizations to elevate the voices of disproportionately impacted communities, including looking at ways to honor the cultural history of this area. And last time we met, this was the alignment. So couplet streetcar, west traveling north on 23rd, west on York, south on 26, and then returning one-way eastbound on Wilson to join 23rd. This York alignment was really a legacy of when we were considering alignment that was east of US 30. And based on conversations with the property owners, we started evaluating some other options. So this one is the two-way streetcar option on Wilson. Just streetcar would come up 23rd, travel down Wilson, stop at terminate at Montgomery Park, and then go back on Wilson. And we found that this was fatally flawed. It doesn't work for streetcar operations because of the delay that it would cause at the 23rd Bond US 30 intersection. And also it would eliminate access for property owners on Wilson. So that one is not viable. This is the alignment for the streetcar that you will see in the transportation draft next week. So we have a separate transportation plan that we're going to email to you all a week from today. You'll get a chance to see it before anyone else. And this shows Roosevelt. It'll show Roosevelt and Wilson with a tail track. So streetcar would travel again one way westbound on Roosevelt, stop at Montgomery Park, and then go back on Wilson. This is sort of a natural progression of the design of the streetcar alignment. It's compatible with the other planning that's been done to date, and our engineering review doesn't reveal any significant impact to traffic operations, including the ramp here at the Vaughan 23rd intersection. As it would with any of the other options, it will require the northern section of the ESCO site to meet street connectivity requirements. So we're showing these as just as indications of there needs to be a street connecting that along the alignment of 25th, connecting north to Nicolai, and there needs to be some east-west street connection. It doesn't necessarily need to be right at York, could be a little further north. There's flexibility in this.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, before you move on, Reza and Phil had their hands up.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and then I wanted to provide a bit more context.
Terrific. Okay.
Okay.
Phil, go ahead.
We're going to let Reza go first. We may be saying the same thing.
Okay.
I have a question. So I understand why the one block couplet makes more sense than two block couplet. But you mentioned that the two block couplet was fatally flawed because of impacts to operations at 23rd and Vaughan.
No, the one that was fatally flawed is the alignment that would be it's not a couplet at all. It's streetcar travel down Wilson
right.
and then turning back around.
That's what I meant. But you mentioned that this one on the screen here is fatally flawed.
Yes.
At 23rd and Vaughan, but the one block couplet wouldn't be, and I'm confused as to why that is.
Yes, excellent question. I'll start, and if others from people want to chime in. It has to do with both of the streetcars turning at this intersection versus one traveling up and not getting stuck in the queue back here. Does anyone else have anything to add?
Yeah.
So one part of it is that the northbound streetcar would have to sit there on 23rd to wait to trigger the signal and stop all traffic to make the turn. And so then that would back up traffic into the Vaughan and 23rd intersection. Whereas if it goes north to Roosevelt, we can time the signal so that it clears both of those signals and doesn't have to stop until Roosevelt, which is just having that extra block provides more queuing space and everything. The other thing, and Roosevelt will be easier to make the turn because it's a T intersection, easier to stop traffic. And then the other issue was that Wilson already exists between 23rd and 24th and between 25th and 26th. And you wouldn't be able to have a streetcar going in both directions on a single track and still have vehicles be able to access all those driveways of those businesses.
Yeah, and finally, this option, the one we have here came up as, as part of our public outreach back in the day. So, and it's something that the property owners at Montgomery Park were still interested in. So we took a closer look. But also the York alignment is, if you will, it's a legacy idea from when we started the project, when we were looking at streetcar on both sides of Highway 30. So that we, through the public process, we decided to focus, the attention of land use change to this side of the freeway, and therefore, reevaluating the alignment. We don't have a reason like we did in the Pearl. We needed to go by the Good Samaritan Hospital. Here we can run a streetcar on two streets next to each other. I think that's better. Operationally, it's cheaper. It's a shorter alignment, and also it can provide the access to a tail track, if you will, to Montgomery Park, something that we've heard quite often. But still maintain operations because it's a shorter alignment. So all these factors are pointing to a new alignment that you did not see before, but it's roughly a refinement of something that's already been discussed with you. So
I think another factor, Mauricio, just from the land use side, is that it allows a little more flexibility for the larger acreage on the north side of the ESCO site to evolve over time rather than committing to that east-west connectivity in exactly the street location.
Exactly. We would like to, and I think property owners in the area, move rather quickly on 23rd, and this, the development of this full area may take decades. So, and the ESCO folks, 1531, have told us their program starts south to north. So I think this would allow us to move quicker with project development for streetcar and other infrastructure. So I think that's, a good move overall. And therefore we met with ESCO and Montgomery Park to begin to understand what does it mean streetcar, what are some of the pros and cons. And out of that discussion came out this new alignment, again, consistent with what we've discussed so far.
Phil, did you have a question that was different from Reza's?
Yeah, I'm fine with this alignment, and I think we all know streetcar is the centerpiece of the study, but I think it would provide useful context on a map like this to also show the bus routes.
Mhm.
Because
Well, we
streetcar
have
is
that
not the
next.
only transit mode serving the study area. There's several bus routes also in the immediate proximity, especially a new one over the Fremont Bridge, which I think will be important.
That's coming. It's in subsequent
All
slides.
right, thank you.
Steve? Oh, you're muted. We can't hear you, Steve.
There we go. Interested in the impacts on Northwest 23rd from Northrop to Wilson
Mhm.
or
Well,
Vaughn. I mean,
right.
the concerns, let me be more specific. The concerns that I've heard, or the impacts that I've heard mentioned previously, have been the loss of a lane of curb parking along 23rd and the inability to do a southbound turn off of Northrop for the streetcar.
I will say that we are going to study we have a Northwest 23rd Streetscape plan that is in the works, or it hasn't started yet, but we will do that planning effort. And Mauricio, do you want to comment more about the?
Yeah, good questions. We have an opportunity, right, which is we need that stretch of 23rd is in bad shape, needs to be repaved. Here's an opportunity to actually do something.
Right. No, I understand all of that.
Significant about it, but what it takes and what we discussed with the larger Northwest area is to do a streetscape plan to look comprehensively at this.
But please, I'm sorry, but these specific impacts have been mentioned previously as being actual, and I'm just wanting to confirm for the sake of my group, are those likely to be the impacts? Yes or no?
Well, we haven't analyzed it. It is
Okay,
likely that.
Okay, that's fine, but that's what had been relayed previously.
Yeah, and we haven't quite analyzed it, so I can give you an answer. However, it's very much scoped in the work that we're going to embark on next fiscal year.
But that's dependent on the streetscape study?
It depends on many factors. There are, like, just including here, there are utilities, there are opportunities.
Oh, yeah. No, I understand, but the streetscape study is far from definite at this point, I would say. So
it's no, it's funded by the city of, it's in our budget. All right.
Through the PSAC?
Not the streetscape plan. That's my understanding.
Two things are getting confused here. Sorry, we might be using the same term for two different things. The parking committee, I believe, is funding some streetscape work south of Lovejoy on 23rd and 21st and some other streets.
From York to Burnside was the original proposal.
Okay, we'll need to revisit that. The last thing I had heard from
needs to be clarified.
Let's move on. Yeah, we can follow up. My understanding is funded. So okay. Let's move on. Yeah, thanks, Phil, for that question. We do have more transit stuff to discuss.
Okay, I just want to do a walkthrough of the vision map, starting with the major roads. Much of the vision for the district, transportation-wise, is the same, and land use-wise, with their few design progression things that I want to point out. One of them is the streetcar alignment. So we're doing this plan because of the near-term and known anticipated land use changes, but also for the opportunity to shape a coherent transit-oriented district here. And extending the streetcar is one of several ways that we're going to help reduce drive-alone trips. So this is a location, this is streetcar alignment again. Also, the yellow indicates new streets. So this is a new private street that will be publicly accessible through Montgomery Park. It's in their plan. And this is just identifying the yellow underneath here, showing the formalization, an extension of Wilson, extension of Roosevelt from 24th to 26th, and the extension of 25th to Roosevelt. And again, those future streets that will be need to be constructed north of Roosevelt. The pedestrian and bike connections within the district build off of the recommended ped bike recommendations for projects from Northwest in Motion. So that means extending the 24th Greenway north to Nikolai, making Vaughn safer, improving all crossings of Vaughn. And we see 24th as really the primary pedestrian and bike entryway into the district. And we see, I also want to point out that we are putting in our plan the recommendation for using the abandoned railroad spur on the north side of Nikolai as a multi-use path. And part of our, one of the things we thought about in developing this is ways for folks to safely get around the US 30 interchanges. So looking at ways to provide safe, low stress routes without having to cross the on-ramp. And we're working with our partners in TriMet on the idea of a transit hub near the end of the streetcar line, which would be a good place to help connect, one of many places where bus and streetcar lines would connect, and folks who are traveling by bus or streetcar could change, but would be a place where maybe the end of the streetcar line, an opportunity for an enhanced transit station area with bike share, scooter share, and design that would elevate the history of this area in a quality public space. I'm going to pause there before we start talking about before Mauricio starts talking about the traffic analysis. Any comments, questions, thoughts? No?
Reza has a question.
Risa has a hand up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Couple of questions. One, what was the, I see there's some stops shown on here for the new streetcar line, and they differ, I think, a little bit from what you showed in previous slides. What was the assumptions made for the stops along this new segment?
The stops, with the exception of the one at Montgomery Park, are still, I'd say they're still very conceptual. We looked for locations that provide a good amount of spacing and that didn't impact the adjacent property significantly. These two are sort of placeholders because there's not, because they don't present conflicts with land use, but I would say that only this one is one that we're most sure about. The other ones could shift.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that we're showing them where it makes sense. We're not into streetcar project development, so things may shift around, but certainly we did not want to provide them too close to 23rd interchange. We wanted to clear that interchange and also provide kind of a central access to the district. And if there's going to be a terminus by facing Montgomery Park building, that would be a nice place for a break, for the operator, and also to catch the train and get going again.
Yeah, but I would
Okay,
take
well,
this with a grain of salt. A future 23rd Avenue study for streetcar
Yeah.
would definitely need to look at exactly where those stops are. And it could be 2 stops, it could be 3 stops. If you're worried about the long gap between Raleigh and Montgomery Park,
Yeah,
maybe
and,
there's
yeah,
maybe there's another
that's-
stop at Thurman,
so
we're just not there yet. Yeah.
And so we're trying to do a lot of things with this plan. One is a land use plan with a long-term vision, and also a bit of a project development for streetcar. Let's make sure we keep our we know what we're looking at. This is very much a concept at this point. We have an alignment. The precise location of stop, far side, near side, all that to be determined with a subsequent project.
Okay. Well, yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
The other question I had is this seems to be missing the whatever future transit line might be on Raleigh Street. That
Yeah.
was in the North Central Service Enhancement Plan for TriMet. So I know it's kind of far off in the future, but it's a line that's very important to the
Yeah.
Pearl District. And
It's on our radar.
it's going to go. I'm not sure where exactly it would make sense to go. Maybe now that this streetcar line is going to 23rd, and then maybe it makes sense to think about what if that line went into that squish area north of Highway 30 and then terminated at the ESCO site to provide more transit coverage in this area. But please include the bus line on Raleigh, the future line on that as well, because that is part of the vision for this part of Portland.
Yeah, this it's an interesting area from a transit perspective. Also, line 16 from St. John's, it's a highly under.
Oh yeah, that should be on there as well. Yeah.
So it'd be nice to
NEC on
have this change here allows us to have a bigger vision. Integrate what would be the larger transit network vision for this district. Having this potential land use changes, allows us to have a deeper conversation with transit and with TriMet in the near term. Especially if we move on with streetcar project, right?
Right.
So good questions.
Okay, Jen, you had a
Jen
question.
has her hand up yet.
Yeah, hi, Julia. I just wanted to express an appreciation for how you've unpacked the complexities of this. And while I understand that there's some future state stuff, I just have to say that it's been great to actually track what's happening, because not everyone who's at this table has all this jargon underneath their belt. So thank you for making it accessible for people who are not familiar with land use planning, but want to help inform decisions that are based on community feedback. So just wanted to say thanks.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I think my slides are next, and I hope not to.
Phil's got his hand up.
Okay, sorry.
Quick one. That was a nice comment from Jen, so I agree. Line 24 doesn't show up on this map. It might on a more finished map. Related to line 24, I think it's a key transit connection over the river, but it only touches this area barely with what's now a real funky bus stop between Thurman and Vaughan on 23rd. So I think how that stop works in the future is going to be pretty important for the whole transit network.
Yeah, we'll certainly have an action item identified in the plan to, we're engaging Entitlement now, but to continue and have a more thorough conversation as these changes take place. If adopted by council, of course, now here, we're just beginning the discussion.
All right.
All right, so I hope not to undo what Jen just said, not overwhelm you with information. So I'm gonna provide a very broad view of the traffic analysis, and the circulation at a very high level. We hope to, no pressure right now, like a little. So basically, what we're talking about now is, we take into consideration what Julia just mentioned. There will be a streetcar, there will be more new streets of high quality, high urban design standards. New bikeways and waste and transit options. But of course, with growth in an area that already has a lot of traffic, what does it mean? To do that, we take these numbers that we've shown you in the past and today, just thousands of new jobs here and housing units. What does it mean for the street network? So basically what we do that we use a transportation model. We translate those numbers into numbers that belong to a block, representing buildings and activity, and we run the model with existing traffic and all that stuff. So we have done that. So basically what we do is we don't measure the future against today, because obviously the city of Portland will continue to grow and new buildings are coming up as we speak. So we develop a 2040 vision and then by the region, and that is accompanied and supported by a traffic model. And we use that traffic model to do fine work at a local scale like here. So we have a 2040 comparison, no build, we call it. Basically, we did not have any land use changes. What would be the traffic situation? So we compare that to a discussion draft, the changes that Barry just talked about. So to do that, we take the model and we've added new streets, right? We added, in this case, across. Doesn't mean that that's exactly what ISCO's going to do, but just for purposes of connecting traffic and trips, we've added that. Also, if you recall, we just talked about a Roseville Wilson couplet. So you will have Roseville going westbound, 2 lanes of traffic, and Wilson 2 lanes going eastbound. Everything else, I think, remains as is in terms of two-way circulation. With the addition that at Vaughan, that big intersection, we have restricted the left turn from north, I guess I'll do it backwards for you, northbound onto the freeway, 23rd. So to simplify operations and provide hopefully a better walking, driving, riding transit, streetcar through the interchange. The idea, a big idea is that, we have 2 interchanges 6 blocks apart. That provides an opportunity to maybe push some of the traffic onto Nikolai, because it's, less and make the interchange less overwhelming at 23rd and Vaughan. Finally, what we have now, it's, you know, what the model has is an industrial district, which is very, very auto-centric. As we transition to a mixed-use district with, again, street connectivity, trees, sidewalks, bikeways, transit opportunities, and ability to walk to your destination and so forth, you will not be so auto dependent. Therefore, there's an adjustment made for how people will travel through the district. So in a way, this district now behaves a little bit more like south of Vaughan today, a more mixed use area, which is more pet friendly and transit friendly, bike friendly than what this area to Vaughan to the north is. So those are the assumptions going into the model. So any questions? Is that Reza a question now or a legacy hand up?
No, that's a question now,
Okay.
or more of a comment.
Okay.
The no left turn from southbound to eastbound at 23rd and Vaughan, what will need to be done to make sure that traffic doesn't get just shifted to 24th, which is meant to be the bike priority street through here? We don't want that. I mean, I think Northwest Motion might.
Yeah, Northwest Motion
address that, but
yeah, Northwest Motion has a project which would prohibit traffic going south of Vaughan from north of Vaughan on 24th. So that helps.
Yeah, I think that, that would help.
Yeah. So so I had 2 more slides, and then so basically overall, despite the changes, you know, to more walking, more transit, more you know, what did I miss? Biking. There would be an overall increase in traffic coming from the study area. That means both sides of the freeway, particularly on the west side, right? Almost all of the new trip. So more traffic. And so therefore more traffic overall in the study area, plus a bit to the north of Nikolai, not very much, a little bit south of Vaughan, a little bit more, but not a ton. Some of the traffic goes onto Highway 30. There's quite a bit more traffic that goes to the freeway and does not come to local streets. However, there's more traffic on the local streets. So then west of Highway 30, the internal study area local network, the new streets, the couplet will work pretty well. We're talking about PM peak, right? To imagine yourself 2040 PM peak, which is the worst, typically the worst part of the day in terms of volume of traffic. So the streets, the couplet helps, the new connections help. I think a streetcar could flow pretty well through the district. There will be more traffic onto Nikolai, onto the collectors between 23rd and 24th. I think I forget the numbers of eastbound, about 140 new cars. We're talking about Nikolai has hundreds of cars and maybe thousands of cars an hour. So, but it's adding more to Nikolai. It's particularly between 23rd and 24th. A bit more traffic on Highway 30 north of Nikolai. To the point in which increases the volume to capacity from 0.96 to 0.98. Volume to capacity means basically supply and demand, amount of cars, volume, capacity, the ability for the car to absorb it. So it's getting pretty congested. It's already congested at 0.96. One, it would be total gridlock is bringing it even closer to gridlock on the southbound direction. But so that's why we're flagging it. Again, the point is that we wanted to make some of the traffic. There's a lot more traffic internal to the district now. So some people are looking ways to get to the freeway further north, and that's some of the impact that you see there. Next slide. Was there a hand? Anyway, I'll keep going. So east of Highway 30, as part of our study area, there will be some increases, but it should not affect its industrial operations. These are low volume streets and should remain low volume streets 20 years during the peak time. And then at 23rd and Vaughan and Highway 30 area, because of the restriction, the no left turns, there is a significant decrease in the southbound Northwest 23rd to volumes north of Vaughan. The traffic comes from the district and uses Vaughan. So instead of, so there's a kind of a shift from 23rd to Vaughan eastbound primarily. So there's an increase there. let's see what else. So that's a distribution, but overall, there are fewer trips using the 23rd Vaughn interchange, and a little bit more again on the next one on Nikolai. To the point in which the V over C, again, the capacity, the congestion metric goes down from 0.95 in 2040 to 0.90. I think that's encouraging to us. And then south of Vaughn, there will be more traffic on the south streets, on the north-south streets, in the range, 40 to 70 trips an hour, so maybe one to two cars an hour in the peak, relative to hundreds, right, that are already there. Except for southbound 24th, again, Reza, that's because we will have traffic would not be able to enter that leg of traffic. So overall, the links, what we call street segments or highway segments, are remaining below 1.0. So I think we will be largely meeting the thresholds that we have for traffic mitigation. So things are looking pretty good overall. That's the full picture. I hope, Jen, I did not fail you this time. And Julia, like I did not so bad as compared to Julia. Is that understood? So basically it works internally. There is certainly more traffic in two areas, streets that already have a lot more traffic. So I understand that. However, from a planning perspective, we can handle that system-wide. And in the streetcar should be able to maneuver within the new district fairly well.
Mauricio, this is Nicholas. It might be helpful, since you're proposing to not allow the left turn from 23rd onto the freeway. How do people get onto the freeway if they're not doing it from 23rd?
Yeah, it would appear I can do more work, but primarily folks from the district will be using Vaughn, 24th, 25th, 26th, 27th to catch Vaughn this way. And you can feel quite a bit of a jump of traffic at Vaughn and between 23rd and 24th, and a pretty significant decrease at 23rd. So there's kind of like a reshuffling of traffic that will happen.
Thanks.
Does that answer the question? Yeah.
Yes.
Phil, I think.
Yeah, I really appreciate what seems like a thorough analysis, and you've explained it pretty well. But intuitively, I still have a hard time with all the new development already happening west of Wardway and Montgomery Park itself. I can't imagine that that's not going to blow out the 23rd and Vaughn interchange location. Even if you deflect as much of that traffic to Nikolai as you can, more development means more traffic, as you said, and I can't imagine how a very fragile intersection today isn't going to collapse in the future. Streetcar doesn't help, but it's just one of many modes using that intersection, but I wouldn't want to see streetcar delayed to that intersection either.
Yeah, good point. Those are the numbers I have. Of course, as we do more analysis for streetcar and project development, we'll know more. But this is the system-wide look. We have consultants who are going to look into more detail. So we'll publish something by November, Julia. So at the big number scale, I understand, traffic is traffic and it feels pretty overwhelming today. So I'm just reporting on what the model says in the future. And again, relative to a no build, right? Even if we don't do any land use changes, it will continue to be growth.
Mauricio, one thing you told me, and tell me if I've understood this correct, but one thing that affects this is that the mixed use land use has a little bit less peaky behavior than the employment-based land use. And so part of what we're doing even though we're getting a lot more development, a lot of that new development is spread out more evenly in the day than the employment that's there now.
Yeah, and there's actually so much that goes into the model that is hard to parcel out, but largely speaking, yeah, we're not starting from a blank slate. So it would be a lot of employment. Montgomery Park, as CO parking today, that would transition to a more mixed use district in which not everybody hits the freeway at 5 p.m. Like they do today. So,
Okay. Did anybody need to see the map again, or are we doing okay, folks? So that kind of gives you a little bit of a sense of what we've got out there. We know that discussion draft that we sent to you is a lot of stuff, and the transportation is going to have a lot in it too. I was going to mention that. Well, I've got another slide. I just want to kind of walk you through what we think the rest of the process is, and then hear a little bit more from you all about your thoughts on stuff. But just the volumes that you have right now, I didn't mention this up front, but I guess I'll mention it now. Volume 1 is kind of the plan part of it, the policy part of it. And the first chapter in that, the summary and overview, we intended that to be almost a standalone thing that one could use as an abridged version and walk around with that, if that's the elevator speech part of it, right? It's the first 10 or 15 pages of it. It doesn't have any code, but it kind of tells a story of what we're proposing. And then all the other chapters in that discussion draft that follow that are kind of like supporting material and more information, right? The background, the community involvement, and then the last chapter about the implementation approach kind of gets into more of the weeds of the nuts and bolts. That's all in that volume 1. And the volume 2 is strictly, that's all zoning code stuff. So super wonky for folks that don't read the zoning code, for people that focus on the zoning code, it's the most important thing, right? But the thing to focus on that, for those of you that aren't super tuned into the zoning code, the commentary on the left-hand side of the page really gives you the intent of what the zoning code is trying to do in there. So that is a way to look at that if you don't want to read, code language that doesn't make any sense, but you kind of want to get a sense of what we're after. But we walked through a bunch of that when we talked just now. So let me just share one more slide, because I just want to show you where we're at in the process, and then we'll just open it up and we can have some questions and answer your questions, or talk a little bit more. We might actually finish on time, which would be amazing. Let's see. So this, if you guys can see that slide, I'm sure you can. So this is where we're at now. So as Julia said, we're going to get you the transportation plan in a week, and we'll email that to you or make that available via the link one way or the other next week. And then we're looking to get your comments. And again, they don't have to be super detailed comments. You can save those for the discussion draft. But if there's big things that you are like, I don't understand what you're saying here, or this doesn't make sense, we'd really like to know that, because that way we could try to fine tune the message in the plan documents, or try to make it clearer for folks. We'd like to get those before 11/17, so a couple of weeks. We are going to have office hours. I've got those listed there. One on, I think that's a Wednesday the 10th. Then that's I believe a Thursday the 15th, and no, it's a Monday the 15th and a Tuesday the 16th. So what we would ask you guys to do is, if you want to talk to us more directly, you could do a video or phone call or whatever. Probably a video is the easiest. Just send us a note and tell us which of those time slots work for you, and we can like slot in a 15-minute to 30-minute time slot to kind of walk through your questions, concerns, or whatever verbally, if you don't want us to do them in writing. So that's really to help us kind of, answer your questions, and then help us actually shape this document a little bit. We're aiming to publish, I've said this before in the past, we're aiming to publish a discussion draft, but we're really going to try to do it this time, either late November or early December. So that's why your comments will be helpful for us to kind of shape this document. We're going to do another online summary and a questionnaire. And our intent is to try to frame the kind of the high level pieces of the land use and the transportation in a way that is digestible for people that aren't, land use or transportation wonks, that, so that they can understand this stuff at a high level. And then, do a questionnaire that's not super lengthy. I know that we had some feedback on the earlier, when we did the scenarios back a year ago or more than a year ago, that was too long, maybe too complicated. So we're really trying to check to make sure that we're not asking any questions with bias. We're trying to make them clear and objective, but relatively simple. So we're working through that. With that discussion draft, a lot of traditionally what we've done in BPS is we have that discussion draft document out there with all the detail, and people read that and review it and go through with a fine tooth comb. And we were looking to get their comments either at the high level or the detailed comments by the end of January or thereabouts. So we want to leave it out there in the public for at least a couple months. That's our goal. And we are going to be reaching back out to several groups, including the 4 community organizations that we worked with initially, and then some other ones. Getting There Together Coalition's been mentioned. The OPAL, which is Organizing People, Activating Leaders, and maybe some of the other groups that are out there in the community. They're more equity focused, to check in on the public benefits that we're trying to achieve, the affordable housing, the affordable commercial, things of that nature. Are we heading in the right direction? Do they seem appropriate? Do the tools work? And then we're thinking we would like to meet with you one more time, maybe in February or March, to at least share with you what we heard from the public comments, and hopefully maybe give you a preview of the proposed draft that we would be putting together for Planning and Sustainability Commission. So that's kind of what I've got. So other thoughts on what you heard today, or what we're aiming to aim at before we release this?
Barry, I'll just add one other note that we've also been doing some amount of work to continue calibrating whether this proposal is financially feasible to implement, right? Because it depends on both private and public actors to move forward. And so that work continues, and we will be continuing to meet with property owners to compare notes on that question and get their feedback on that as well. So just to be fully transparent about that.
Yeah. And you will see in the document, for instance, in the code, there's some not specified costs, and we're still those. I think that's what Eric is referring to primarily, about the cost for the affordable housing benefit. And so we are working through that, and there may be other ways to achieve that. As we said earlier, if we work with the property owners and get feedback from other folks that a development or a benefit agreement of some sort that could define that more specifically were to be achieved, we probably wouldn't have to do it through a set of bonuses in the code. But I do think that the height limits and the bulk that we've kind of specified, the ranges of sizes of buildings, are approximately what to expect. The EX zone allows buildings that range up to 65 feet, which is about a 6-story building. The bonus allows it to go to a 7-story building-ish. And then, if you go for the super bonus with the plan development, that gets you up to 10 or 12 stories, the scale of the Montgomery Park building or something, not that bulky necessarily, but that height limit. So those 3 levels are still kind of what we're proposing, what we're thinking, but we want to hear feedback on that too. I see Greg's got his hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that was a good segue into my previous question about one of your slides. I don't know if you can go back to that, but the 3-dimensional one is, how's that tie in there? Is it useful to kind of help look at the visual of what some of those additional FARs and base units are?
I think of this as being more illustrative than anything else. I mean, I think it's pretty conceptual, but that diagram was trying to say, buildings could be up to these heights. I think these are showing up to 10 stories in these areas. We showed this in the area where, the larger 5-acre or more sites are likely located. Some of the smaller stuff, the 4 or 5 story stuff, is down here on Vaughn because those sites are smaller. Similarly, over here on Roosevelt, smaller site, lower scale. And then we try to transition, this diagram doesn't show it as very well, but then transition down towards the Nikolai border here, showing more lower scale industrial type buildings that might have a big footprint, but they're not super tall. And this is very done for purposes of illustrating how different it could be versus, you know, the existing kind of regulations that allow something more like this.
And I would just add that while it's conceptual, it's actually, you know, it's calibrated, it's possible that the proposal would allow something like this to happen.
And this is showing something more akin to what the plan development, the higher intensity bonus would allow, rather than the lower intensity bonuses or the base. Those would be, the base would be much smaller, and even the mid-range inclusionary housing or the affordable housing bonus would be smaller scale because you couldn't get to these height limits.
Okay, no, that's fine. That's good. Actually, you know, I was involved with the Conway plan, and you know, they built a actual model, and it was actually visually, it was pretty good just to see what that impacts. You know, my concern is, and I think a lot of the neighbors, is just looking down on the industrial area. And I was looking through that second report, and it does show, you know, the changes of the Giles Lake plan to the Vaughn Nikolai plan.
Yep.
And you know, that's what I need to report back to our group on, is what kind of impact that's going to have on the development in the area as it looks down upon the Nikolai area. And of course, some of my feedback I've been giving is just the impact of the egress for trucking in the master plan, freight master plan for Nikolai, and what kind of impact all these residential homes are going to do as far as exiting through Nikolai and bottlenecking that. I mean, we've already avoided Vaughn as a trucking route in several ways, and now, you know, now the vehicles are going to be moving towards Nikolai. It's going to be a challenge. So, and you know, you can't stop progress, but I see we might want to just think ahead, like you're doing with the traffic and all that.
Greg, I want to also highlight one specific question that we've been grappling with a little bit that you know, we'd love your input on is, Barry, on the zoning map, we left a small square west of Highway 30 still in the industrial zoning north of, I think it was north of York, right?
Yeah, I'll show it to you here.
And
right here.
yeah, and so we've had a few conversations with folks who have businesses in that area about whether it makes sense to leave that industrial, or whether, you know, the parking impacts would just be too much, and that we should just shift that with this proposal. And with the initial proposal, we erred on the side of minimizing the loss of industrial land. But that's an open question as to whether that little square there is a viable remnant to keep industrial or not.
Either way, we would probably, if we transitioned that, we had shown that earlier as a transition, this block, the blocks between Nikolai and Reed would probably have that EG zoning, so that would maintain the buffer to the industrial area to the north. But this block here could potentially go more mixed use. But like Eric said, we erred on the side of caution and conservative approach to the industrial land in this proposal, but looking to hear feedback.
Yeah, well, you know, if my feedback would be, yeah, I would keep it industrial. I know McKenna's there. They have probably close to 80 employees, all well-paid jobs, well-positioned, good positions, and with great focus, as our survey did and our work that we did with Columbia Corridor, it shows that there's a lot of good living wage jobs for BIPOC populations and people that have little exterior or additional education past high school. So yeah, it's an interesting, I appreciate that feedback, because I look at that immediate area and it's a high concentration of really good wage industrial jobs. So it's kind of an anomaly that hits right in the middle of there. And yeah, I personally, I favor a lot of those jobs, and I know a lot of the, you know, the business owners in that area personally.
I'm gonna see Brian's had his hand up for a little while, so let's go Brian, and then I see Steve's got his hand up, and then we'll take other comments or questions.
Yeah, I was just, from looking at the discussion draft, there was, and I see Lisa's on, there's a few mentions of Prosper Portland, which is fairly new. I'm just wondering what's the background on that? And at what point do they get engaged, and in what forum and discussions? Has there been? I just saw it on a, what was it?
Probably in the
north-
action charts.
The action chart, yeah, and I hadn't, and there's no explanation, or, it just kind of appeared. So I was just curious about that.
At this
Can
stage,
maybe start and then invite if Lisa's still on the call to add to, but they've been at the table throughout the process, and are inevitably involved as we start talking about the possibility of an agreement between the city and property owners. And so they're kind of typically play a role in facilitating and helping us sort that out, and have a lot of experience on that aspect of, where this might go next. Lisa, do you want to add?
No, I think I would just build on, it gets back to one of the comments Eric made earlier, which is understanding what the bonus impact is on the real estate financial dynamics of building. So I think it's between the bonuses and a benefit agreement and a land use change, what do the economics really look like, and what can be negotiated either through regulatory change or a public benefit agreement? And how kind of real would they be? Because the direction we collectively have gotten from council offices to date is that they want to see what they would call equitable development, which really translates in many ways into an affordable housing and or commercial stabilization play happening concurrent with the transportation going in. And so I think when I think about it, it's two dynamics. What's the economics of what's happening on the real estate side? How real is it that we can both do this from a regulatory standpoint, as well as then further kind of ask through a public benefit agreement? And the second is, I think we have some timing questions about how do we make sure it's latent value that's going to be caught up in the land while zoning change happens and transit improvements happen. And so how do you affect development that folks want to see ASAP at the same time as a streetcar alignment is going in? And how real is that? Or does it really have to happen at the time that somebody's going to pull a permit for a new project or do some sort of land transfer through a purchase and sale?
Steve, I saw you had your hand up. Why don't we go ahead and, I hope, Brian, did that help answer your question a little bit?
It did.
Okay, great. Steve.
Thank you, and thank you for all the information. I really appreciate it. And I have one question and two requests. The question is the Pepsi proposal, is that an example of a planned development?
It is. It was the very first one that utilized the new code in the commercial mixed use zone. So yes,
Okay.
it is. Yeah.
Okay, and if there are others, if you could just shoot me what those might be, I would appreciate it.
Okay, that's the
And
only
the two
one.
requests, I'm sorry.
I think, Steve, I think that's the only one, but
That's the
I'll
only one.
check.
Okay, all right. And the two requests are just things that have come up in the course of this meeting, some clarifications. One of the relationship of changes in the base zoning and incentivization through bonuses, and the economics of those basically relative to the benefits proposal. I mean, I think there's some really fundamental questions there that need to be sorted out that I think are kind of in the drift of what you're wanting to have feedback on. So any clarification you can get to us on that, I would appreciate it. And similarly, and forgive my bristling about the 23rd Avenue streetscape study and presumably design of streetcar routing on that street, but that's a big issue for NWDA. And I'm just trying to, thought I had understood that there were a couple of specific impacts. And if that's not the case, then I would very much like we would very much like to know that, because it utterly influences the entire view to that aspect of the project, which is pretty critical. And kind of as a subset of that, it's just clarifying, is that work being funded through the parking district? So if there's two different things, then clarify that. If it is one thing, then clarify that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, Steve, the best way to think about this might be that what we're talking about in this plan is mainly a land use vision for the area north of Vaughan, and how do we serve it by transportation. And all we've really landed on is we think that conceptually extending the streetcar from its terminus at 23rd Avenue up to this district makes sense. But we will have to do an entire engineering study and alignment study with alternatives to really develop that. And that could be, we assume that's two-way on 23rd. Maybe there's other alternatives we can look at. We can't say anything about parking until we look at the utilities, water lines. So it's sort of like we have to phase it where this is mainly land use and a conceptual streetcar alignment. We're going to have to do a follow-up study that really gets in the details of the streetcar alignment. And that's not really the same. It's not the parking committee work that you're thinking of. That's really focused more on sidewalk amenities and things like that. So there are two parallel efforts here. We're talking about more of an engineering sort of study for a streetcar alignment.
Well, part of the confusion is the initial proposal for the streetscape study to the parking district was seemingly quite expensive, and that would explain why it was expensive.
Right.
I think that's the case, and I think we've got it backed off on that. Now it's tabled completely. So
I think what happened is that we initially proposed a streetscape plan that would look at all the way from Burnside to Vaughan, and it would include both sidewalk amenity type things and the streetcar component.
Right.
I think our feedback was that was too much. That's too much to combine those two things. So we're breaking them apart, and it'll be a separate effort. And we have it in our budget to do that as a follow-up to this.
If somebody could just tap out something to clarify all of that, it would be very helpful to.
Well, again,
and maybe we shouldn't call it a streetscape plan.
Yeah,
maybe it's a 23rd Avenue streetcar alignment plan. Or something. Yeah.
But just some clarification would be very helpful to our folks.
I want to build on what Zeph said, rather, just to clarify. I think while the streetcar is responding to a land use kind of vision for the area, the two things are integrated, right? The land use vision for that area at the intensities that we're talking about just doesn't stand on its own without some kind of a high intensity, transit like that service. So the things are linked pretty well, hence the conditions that we've talked about before. So
right.
Hopefully it all comes
sorting out where the funds come from is certainly an interesting question. So
anybody else have we're right at 6 o'clock, which is kind of amazing because I thought we'd be way over. Anybody else have any questions or comments for the good of the order before we disconnect here? I'm not seeing everybody waving their hands. So please, just send us an email.
Yeah, that happened before.